What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over more controller logic. So in this case, we are going to be going over the pop-ups that appear if you want a player to be able to join and take control of AI. I know we haven't gotten into AI yet. However, when we play our game, say we're fighting an opponent that is not a human, and a controller is detected, we're going to want to be able to pop up a little widget that says press, any button or any key to join. Now, this would not be currently present because I still have control over both player 1 and player 2 right now. I haven't made any adjustments to that. So with that said, we won't want to do this the entire time, have it on the screen all the time like we have here. This is just for demonstration. In the next episode, we're going to be going over multiple controllers with our new player controller setup. And when we do that, this will make a lot more sense and will actually be usable. But right now, I just wanted to show you, I want to get this in place and show you how you can set this up. Because I think it's a fun widget, it's a good one to use in the future, or if a controller is detected, and I think it'll be useful in the next episode to show off what we did. So long story short, I wanted to have this ready so we could do everything that we want to do in our next episode, and it'll be a lot easier to tell what's going on. So you can see I have this press any key to join little flashing widget, and if I change to my controller, it then says press any button to join. Now this is actually good. This is what we want. We want it to detect what the player is using, and then we want it to kind of send information to the game about that. And we already do that with the gamepad logic. But I wanted to change it up a bit, so if I use the keyboard last, and that's what I'm going to be using, then I want it to know, to expect at least, that it'll be any key that joins. And then also with the gamepad here, I want it to be any direction or any button with the gamepad will then say press any button to join. And player 2 is remaining on the keyboard for now because I don't have a second controller in. So that is intended. When we go over 2 controllers in the next episode, you'll see how that of course changes. But that's what we're going to be focusing on today. If you'd like to get caught up in the series, we're on episode 138 of the fighting game tutorial series. We were very far along. We still have many episodes to go, make no mistake. But if you'd like to get caught up and see how we did everything to get to this point, you can click this icon in the top right corner right here. Check out the entire fighting game playlist. However, if you're just interested in the controller stuff, that is perfectly fine as well. All this controller logic should work without any other logic in this series. So if you're just interested in that, I'll link this episode right here, which is the first episode where we started going over this advanced controller logic. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. To get started, we are going to go to a new widget that I've made today, which I'm calling the press any key to join. So I'll go ahead and show you how I set that up. If you want to add a new widget, just go to add new, user interface, and choose your widget blueprint. Once you do that, you have to rename it to whatever you want, and I called it press any key to join. I do have a menu that is called the press any key screen, which is like my screen at the start that flashes text and tells me to press any key to begin. So that is different, so I was pretty specific here, and I made sure to call this one the press any key to join. Now, of course, you can set this up however you want, as this is just an example that I came up with. But I had my widget here, which comes with a canvas panel by default. I've added a canvas panel under that so I could directly choose the sizes without adjusting anything else. So to do that, if you want to follow this directly, I've added a canvas panel onto the first canvas panel here. So this is the overall canvas panel, the overall widget. And then I've added an actual canvas panel for the size. Alternatively, you could just decrease the size of this canvas panel. Up to you. I prefer working with the actual numbers, so I found it easier to do this, but there really are so many different ways to do it. I'm not going to go too deep into that, and you guys have already seen some of the other methods. So long story short, I've made a canvas panel, added to my initial canvas panel, and I called this one HUD canvas panel just to separate it. I've changed the size to a specific size that I want. This way I can put this on the HUD, and I changed nothing else about this. On the canvas panel, though, I added text and an image. You don't necessarily have to have both. I'm going to be using this not only as an in-game feature, but also while we're working on these next few controller episodes as things get a little bit trickier. I want to be able to show you what was going on, which was one of the main purposes of doing this before the 2 controller episode. So I'm going to have both the text and an image, whether it be keyboard or gamepad, to show you what's going on for each player. That way we can tell what is happening and what I'm pressing, even though you can't see where my hands are in real life and what I'm pressing on the controllers. So I have both text and image, but you could do just one or the other if you want. And so these are both in common, or you can search for them in the palette, but I've just brought text onto my HUD canvas panel and then image onto my HUD canvas panel. Called the text, press any input text, and the image, input device image. Okay, again, this is all up to you what you want to do. There is one very important thing, which is the binding, but I'll show you my settings in case you want to match it directly. You can look at my positions here. I basically just gave it a position so it's not directly against the top of the canvas panel, and then I allowed it to span the entire width of the panel, but only have given it this size, so whatever text I put in here won't overflow into this image as well. Given outline settings of 2 to give it a nice black outline. And I've set the justification of the text to be in the center. So typically it would look something like this, but I really don't want it to look like that if I can avoid it, because I'd rather it be centered in the widget. So that's what the center justification does. And if you want to get to the outline settings, by the way, you just click font under appearance, and then you can click outline settings and you'll get to the size. Haven't changed anything else in here except the binding, but the binding is the most important part, and we'll get to that in a minute. I'll show you how I set up the image as well. So the image is the same deal. I've set both of these to anchor at different points. I chose an anchor for this guy because I wanted him to be at the center, and these image, they may change depending on what images you have. If you have a gamepad or keyboard, there might be different sizes. And because of that, I wanted to anchor it so that it could always be in the middle. You can choose the actual middle here, and this will be perfectly fine. But when you actually look at this, it's going to go off the top left of the image, right? So you can either manually change the positions, as you've seen me do in the past, or you can change the alignment. And it will explain it here what it's doing, but literally it's just changing from, if you think of this as a texture and as a material as we've gone over, the top left is 0, 0, the bottom right is 1, 1. So 0.5, 0.5 is right in the center. If we set that to be the pivot point or the alignment of 0.5, 0.5, it's going to put this image to be at the center of the location that we've chosen, which is the center anchor, the middle anchor. All right. That's how that can work. And so now, no matter if this image changes size or different dimensions, it will still be in the center area. We don't have to apply some fake offset to get it to look good. All right, and then you can look at my sizes and positions if you care. The rest of this I haven't touched, except for the binding yet again. Okay, so we're going to go over both these bindings right now. So in this widget, I have bindings to determine if it's a gamepad, and then I want to change the text and the image. So the text is going to change. I have the default as press any input to join, and that would work for, you know, all devices. But if it's a keyboard, I specifically change it to press any key to join, and if it's a gamepad, I have it to press any button to join. Although press any input to join would also work, but just to make it very specific so we know what we're working with. And then for the image, I'm just going to actually change it to one of 2 images that I have. I've added them here. I have a generic gamepad image, and then I also have a generic keyboard image. All right, so let's go into these bindings. So for the text, we specifically want to bind the content. There's a lot of bindings you can do. You can bind the appearance. You can bind, you know, shadow color. We're not doing that. We want to bind the content, the actual text. So make sure you grab that binding, and then you can hit create binding. I already created one, so I'm not going to do it again. And I called mine get press any input text text. I know that name is a little confusing, but that's because this is actually the auto-generated name that it gave me, but it put a 0 on the end, and I just take the 0 off because I don't need it. So I don't know why there's also spaces in here. I'm just realizing this now. I mean, it doesn't hurt anything in the blueprint sense, but it's kind of weird that it did that because my image binding did not put spaces. So I'm just going to do that real quick so it looks a little bit nicer. I'm also going to get rid of the underscore here. Did not notice how much that was bothering me until right now. But anyway, so yes, this is the default text binding that I have. So I have get press any input text. That's this binding on the text. When you come in here, you will have the initial function node, and then you will have one return node that'll be empty in text. So the rest of this I've added. It's actually pretty simple what we're doing here, but we're going to need to grab this owning controller value before you can do anything with it. So when you come in here, you're not going to have these animations. You may have this image and text like I do. You actually don't have to make these variables. I had made them variables in case I wanted to alter anything about them, but I'm doing everything through the bindings right now, so it's not required that you do that either. But there are two things that I want to do that we are going to use today. So I've made a Boolean variable. So you add a variable, just make it a Boolean. I called it isWidget for P1. So for right now, what I'm doing is I'm manually setting this Boolean based on which one it is on the HUD. I know we haven't added this to the HUD yet, but we will. And to do that, I can actually make it instance editable. Once I make this Boolean, if you click on it, you might have to compile and save. You'll have the details panel. And there's something called instance editable, which means you can actually manually pick this on the object that it is put on. So I had added 2 of these widgets to the HUD, in which case I can click on one of the widgets and set the value. So this is the player 1 widget, and this is the player 2 widget. I manually do this. So if we make this instance editable, we'll be able to choose this in the future, which will be useful. Now I've also made an owning controller variable, and it's a base player controller. So if you make a new variable, change the type, and grab your base controller. We've set this up in previous episodes, but if you haven't watched those episodes, it's okay. Basically, base player controller is just my main controller that I use in the game that's a child of a player controller. So I'm just having a reference to that I have here. And that's because this widget, I wanted to keep track of what that controller is doing. If that controller disconnects, even though the player controller is not necessarily the specific physical controller, we can get data about if it disconnects, if one was added. And when we do that, that is when we're going to send data to the controller to say like, oh, this is when we can pop up this message and a few other things like that. So I would like to know what controller in the game, what player controller is owning this widget. All right, and once you've made those variables, these bindings are actually quite easy. So if you get your owning controller, I recommend converting it to a validated get, because we are going to set the owning controller in the construct, but a binding happens so frequently, and it happens every frame. So if you don't set the owning controller on the first frame, then it will be not valid, and if you try and grab a Boolean or a variable from it, it's going to crash or at the very least give you errors. So I recommend converting it to a validated get like I did, or just checking if it's valid, like this. Then once you get this, our player controller has a Boolean called isInputDevice gamepad. And this is how we can switch between which one we're using, switch our controls that are factored in, and how our game is being run, right? We can run 2 players on a keyboard, we can run 1 on a keyboard, 1 on a gamepad, and we'll be able to run 2 on controller, on gamepad as well. So we can just get our Boolean here, drag it out and type branch. And then we have one return node already, unless you got rid of it. If you did, it's okay. You can just type return node and add return node, or you can copy the one you already have and paste it down below. Okay, and what you're going to do is you're going to type in your new logic that you want this text to say. So if the input device is a gamepad, then I'm saying press any button to join. But if it's not a gamepad, I'm assuming right now it's a keyboard or a multiple player input device, such as a keyboard. And so I'm going to say press any key to join. Again, you do with this as you want. This is going to be really helpful for the next episode, so you can kind of see everything I'm doing behind the scenes. I'll do my best to explain it, but the visual cues I think will help since they are logic based and we can see exactly what's going on. Now the image also has a binding, as I talked about, and for this one we want to go to appearance and we want to bind the brush. Not the color and opacity, not any of this other stuff, we want to bind the brush. So you click this one and you create binding, and I called mine get input device image brush. Okay, if I go into this one, we have the same logic as before. We're going to get our owning controller, convert it to a validated get. Then we're going to grab is input device gamepad, bring it into a branch. If it's true, we're going to show the generic gamepad image. This is the controller. Okay, you might be able to see it. Probably hard to see, but this is the blue controller. If it's false, we can assume it's that keyboard or a special device. So I'm going to give it the keyboard image. Okay. The rest of it you don't really need to keep. However, if you're having trouble getting this return node, when you first look at this, it'll probably look like this right here. This is what will happen when you come into this for the first time. You can split the return value on this return node to get all the data about it. I did not change anything other than the return value image, and you can just search for whatever image you want here. And once you've done that, we have both of our bindings in, so actually our widget's pretty much ready to go. The only thing we have to do is actually set the owning controller. That way we can figure out what image and what text to display on the screen. Before we do that, let's actually go to our base game mode HUD and add this widget on there, because otherwise, even if we set up our data correctly, we won't be able to see anything. So I went to my base game mode HUD. I did determine, like, mathematically where I wanted them, and I put them on the same spot on each side, but this is up to you how you do this. I've gone over this before in a few episodes on how you can get things in the perfect spot, but you can also just manually line it up if you'd like. Basically, we're going to need 2 of these if you want to have both players have the possibility of having this widget pop up. Alternatively, you could have just one for player 2, like player 2 press any button to join, and if player 1 loses connection to their controller or whatever, then you can pop up a screen saying controller is disconnected, please reconnect to continue, that sort of thing. So however you want to do it is fine, but we want to make sure we search for the widget, which for me is press any key to join, and you can literally drag it onto the screen. Now I already have 2, so I'm not going to do it, but that's all you have to do to get it in here. And I called the first one P1, press any key to join, and the second one P2, press any key to join. Now, once you get it into place, you don't have to change anything else within here, but there is something that I would do, as I said, for that little hack until we have the finalized logic with the 2 controllers, so we can manually determine if the widget is for P1 or for P2. To do that, since we made this boolean is widget for P1 instance editable, this means anytime there's an instance of it, we can manually change this value. And so on the HUD, the left one is player 1 for now. We don't have side selection yet. And the right one is player 2. So on the left one, I want is widget for P1 to be true. And on the right one, I want is widget for P1 to be false. All right. Now we're looking pretty good. We now have our correct logic for our boolean. We still have to set our owning controller. And I also have 2 animations that I'll show you to do really quickly. They're super easy and make it look a lot nicer. All right, so let's go ahead and get into this logic first so you can test it, and then we'll do the animations. So on event construct within the press any key to join widget, if you don't have it, you'll have it by default, but if you got rid of it, you can just type event construct. This is going to happen basically as soon as the widget is created. And so this is the logic we want to do. So I'm going to grab my game mode. The widget is spawned within the game mode, so the get game mode should be able to be casted to the correct game mode, which for me is called default game mode BP, correctly on the first attempt. This shouldn't fail since, again, the HUD is being created from this game mode, so it should exist. The cache should succeed. You could even pass in a game mode reference after spawning the HUD if you'd like, and then this press any key to join could immediately grab access to it. Just like how this, just like how the HUD has a game mode reference here, you could do that there. But that's up to you. I haven't done that. Nothing you have to do with that. Just throwing out ideas that could be useful. Okay, so our default game mode BP, the only reason we cast that is because we need to grab player 1 and player 2 and grab their controllers. The game mode is the best place to do this as it has the current player 1 and player 2. If you're doing it on a menu or something, you realize we've done it differently because we don't always have player 1 and player 2 set, as these reference the specific characters. But in this case, we only want to reference the characters in the game, not the physical controllers. And so this is the perfect place to do it. So once we get our default game mode BP, I drag off and I grab my player 1 and player 2, I guess I have to erase all that, player 2 variables. And you can see I have them right here, player 1 and player 2. Now, these represent the fighter template characters. So these represent both my mutant characters, or like a mannequin and a mutant when I'm here. And I need to get the controller on each of them, and depending on what widget this one is for, we need to set the owning controller to that controller that owns that character. Okay, so after casting, we grab player 1, player 2, and then we call get controller. Just like this. Once we've done that, we have to then check our is widget for P1 Boolean, right? And we have to drag it into a branch, just like this. Now, if the widget is for P1, we want to use the controller related to the P1, or the player 1, in the game mode. If it's not for P1, then we want to use the controller for player 2 in the game mode. So the logic here is the same. We're just changing what we pass into the cast, because this controller is going to be a default player controller. It's a controller object reference, and we need to make sure this variable, when we made it, it was a base player controller, because we need to grab the is input device gamepad boolean from it. So we need to make sure we cast to it before setting it. Simple enough, drag off get controller, cast it to your controller type. You can do this in both the true and false. And then we just want to set our owning controller to the player controller, just like that. And once you do this, now the owning controller variable will be valid. And so this binding can finally go through, go into this boolean, and then check true or false, and then display the proper text. And same with the brush, it can go through this true, then it can go into the branch and display the proper image. Okay, so simple enough there. Now let's go ahead and make it blink, because without playing these animations, I can skip to it really quickly. You're gonna see it, and it will look good, don't get me wrong. But it's just kind of lingering there, which is really annoying when you're trying to actually fight. Plus, we're going to be enabling it, disabling it only when we need to. It's not going to be there all the time. And when it is here, we can have it blinking, which makes it look much nicer. So if you want to make it blink or add an animation of your own to it, it's very simple. We can go to the design view on the press any key to join widget. And then we can go to, I believe it's window animations. In here, you can click add animation. And I've added one for the text flicker and the image flicker, but you can do whatever you want. We can make a new one here on the spot just to make it easier. So we did text color. Okay, we did that. We can then click on the timeline. If you don't have that, you can also go to window and find timeline. And the animation you click on then has data about it depending on what you've set up. I've set nothing up for the text color, so then I don't have anything to do with it, right? I've only set up the text flicker and the image flicker. So let's do an example. On the text color, we can go add track, all name widgets, and we're going to do this on the press any input text. Now, you'll notice that there's the widget here, and then there's one that says canvas panel slot. So what this means is we can either apply the animation on the press any input text, so on this text right here, or we can actually apply the animation to the spot that it is in this canvas panel. So say this text were to be deleted and something else took this spot, the animation could be performed on that new object that took that spot. For now, we don't need that, so we just use the press any input text. Once you do that, you can add track again, and this is your specific type of change that you want to do. So if I'm changing the text color, then I would want to pick color and opacity. And then I can just literally add keyframes. Okay, so this little center button is to add a new key at the current time. So I can add a key at 0. There's already one there. I don't have to, but you see this little red dot. This is where we're currently at. So if I went ahead and changed the color of the text, let's say I changed it to red. And then when I went to 1 second in, if I added another key here, you'd see that the times up here represent seconds. So 0.75, 1 second. Okay, so after 1 second has passed, I've added a new keyframe. Okay, and now I'm deleted all that because I really don't need it. That was just an example to show you how you could do it. So I'm going to reset my color. And now let's go into these flicker animations so I can show you what I did for them. So the text flicker, you see I used render opacity, not color and opacity. Render opacity. Okay, that's how I get the, if it flickers, because basically we're setting it to be invisible, then visible again. That's what the flicker really is. So I chose render opacity. I've made a keyframe at 0, and I have the value at 1.0. If I am to go over to 1 second, I have the render opacity at 0. I've added another frame here. If I were to stop there, that would be okay. But actually what would happen is it would become invisible. Okay, and then we would loop it. And when it loops, it starts back at 0. So it would actually come full force again. What I wanted to do is go like this. You see the effect up here if you watch the text? See how it fades in, fades out, then fades in? That's what I was going for. So I had 1 second for the fade out, 1 second for the fade in. So if you add another key at 2 seconds and then set the render opacity back to 1 here, then you'll have this animation that is a nice little flicker. The nice part about this is if I just use these 3 keys, it will interpolate the colors and the opacity and whatever we set in here as needed to fit within these keys. So if I have 1 second, it's going to divide up this render opacity change over the time period of 1 second. Now the image flicker is actually the exact same, except I'm using the input device image, setting the render opacity on that to flicker. Simple enough. With these done, we just have to play the animation and we'll be good to go. So I played it on construct of the widget because even if we're not having it there the whole time when it's created, we should probably start the flicker right away. I don't see any reason not to. It's very simple. When you go into your graph now, you will have animations under variables, and they may be enclosed in this little folder or tab. So you can open it up and you can see your animations. We have image flicker and text flicker. We're going to want them both at one point, so I just get them both. Get image, get text. And then you can drag off of it and type play animation. Alright. So, with the text flicker, you can see what I've done above, but the important notes are number of loops to play. As it says here, the number of times to loop this animation, 0 to loop indefinitely. So you can see I set it to 0 up above because I want it to loop forever. While this widget is available, it should loop. And I'm leaving the play mode as forward. No reason to play it in reverse in this case. Playback speed of 1.0 is fine because I set it at the speed that I wanted to make it. At this point, I usually just copy this one and then paste it and then change out the text flicker for the image flicker because I've already changed the number of loops to 0. And in case I changed other settings, then I could simply just keep those settings here. Make sure you connect your execution line again through all this. And there you go. When you are done, you will have one nice widget that flickers and changes image and text based on what each player is using. So again, once I load my game, let's load into this stage. You can see that it's recognizing both players are on keyboard right now, and that is accurate. Okay, I can't get player 2 to go to gamepad right now. I mean, technically we have logic set up for it, but not in our player controller. Not all the logic that we need. That'll be for next episode. So right now, player 2 is solid. Now, player 1 can go to a gamepad successfully at any point. just by pressing any single input. And you can see I've done this now, and now it says press any button to join. So it's recognizing that player 1 is on a gamepad, but player 2 is still using the keyboard. Then if I want to switch back with player 1, you can see that player 1 is now using the keyboard. This will be very helpful for us in the future, especially in the next episode when we go over 2 gamepads or 2 controllers, so both players on a controller. Anyway, guys, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and I really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters and subscribers. Thank you guys for getting so excited to watch these videos week after week. I love working on them, and I'm so glad you guys are enjoying them as much as I am. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I'd be happy to help you out, get you sorted with any of the issues you had, and get you going for the next. Anyway, guys, like I said, that's all I got, so thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.